Those people were already on their way out. I was just running a business. I need you to sit with those words for a moment. Just let them land. Don't rush past them. Don't tell yourself you misheard. Those are the exact words Dominic Hargrove said to a state inspector 8 months before he stood in my courtroom. He said them sitting in a leather chair in his corner office. He said them calmly, the way a man says something he has told himself so many times it no longer sounds wrong to him. He said them about 19 human beings, elderly men and women who had trusted his facility with everything they had left, their safety, their comfort, their dignity, their final days on this earth. Those 19 people had names, they had histories, they had stories that stretched back 70, 80, even 90 years, stories full of love and loss and hard work and sacrifice. Rosa Vasquez, 81 years old, who raised 6 children on her own in Providence after her husband passed away when the youngest was still in diapers. Walter Drummond, 77, a retired elementary school teacher who spent 4 decades shaping the minds of children in this city. Mildred Hayes, 84, who had baked bread from scratch every Sunday morning for her entire neighborhood for over 50 years, who never once let a Sunday pass without feeding someone. Claudette Moreau, 80 years old, who had been a seamstress, who could repair anything with her hands, whose fingers still moved in her sleep like she was stitching something back together. 19 real people, 19 real lives, 19 real stories. And Dominic Hargrove called them a business problem. My name is Judge Frank Caprio. I sit on the bench at Providence Municipal Court. I have been doing this work for more than 30 years. In those 30 years, I have seen arrogance walk through my courtroom door in many different shapes and sizes. I have seen it dressed in expensive suits, and I have seen it dressed in false humility. I have heard it shout, and I have heard it speak quietly, which is somehow worse. But what I am about to describe to you, this case, this man, these 19 people, is the kind of thing that does not leave you. It is the kind of case you carry home, the kind you think about on a quiet evening when you are sitting alone and the house is still. Because this was not just a case of carelessness or negligence. This was not an accident. This was not a system failure that nobody could have predicted or prevented. This was a choice, made deliberately, repeatedly, for money. And the most devastating part, the part that makes this story different from any other I have encountered, is the identity of the person who once taught this man everything he knows. The person who gave him his first chance. The person who poured years of wisdom and kindness and belief into him. That person was also one of the 19. If you believe that every human life has equal worth, whether that person is 20 years old or 90, whether they are powerful or helpless, whether the world still sees them or has already started to look away, then stay with me until the very end. Because what happens in this courtroom is something you will not easily forget. Bailiff Raymond Costello called the case at 9:47 in the morning of February 19, 2026. Case 2026 CR 04871, State of Rhode Island versus Dominic Allen Hargrove. Charges: criminal elder neglect, fraudulent misrepresentation of care standards, willful obstruction of a state regulatory investigation, and deliberate endangerment resulting in documented harm to 19 residents of Willowbrook Care Center, Providence metro area. I looked up from my bench. The gallery behind the bar was packed in a way I rarely see. I mean, every single seat was filled, and there were people standing against the back wall. Family members, sons and daughters, some of them older themselves, some of them clearly having taken time off work to be there. Former staff members from Willowbrook, still wearing the particular expression of people who saw something terrible and could not stop it. A handful of journalists with notepads, and in the front row, directly across from the defendant's table, a man named Leonard Vasquez. Leonard was 58 years old. He was a construction foreman. His hands were wide and thick and calloused, the hands of a man who had spent his entire working life using them. He was wearing a clean button-up shirt that looked like he had ironed it very carefully that morning, perhaps the night before. His eyes were dark and steady. He was holding something against his chest with both hands, a photograph. He was holding it the way you hold something that is the last thing you have of someone. It was a photograph of his mother, Rosa. I noticed Leonard the moment I walked in. I noticed the families. I always have, because in my courtroom, The case is never just the paperwork on my bench. The case is always also the person in the front row holding a photograph. I looked at the defendant's table. Dominic Hargrove walked into my courtroom like a man arriving at a business meeting he had already decided the outcome of. He was 51 years old, but he moved with the heavy confidence of someone who had spent decades being told he was important. His suit was charcoal gray, not flashy, but unmistakably expensive. The kind of suit that is not trying to impress anyone because it does not need to. His silver hair was trimmed to perfection. His shoes shone under the fluorescent lights. On his left wrist, a gold watch with a face the size of a small clock. He set his leather portfolio on the table, sat down, and crossed his legs. Beside him, his attorney, Gerald Phelps, a man who has appeared in this court before on behalf of people who can afford the best representation that money can buy, placed a briefcase on the table with the careful economy of someone who has done this many times. His expression said, "We are prepared to make this long, complicated, and expensive. We are prepared to outlast everyone in this room. I have seen that look. I know exactly what it means, and it has never once changed what I'm going to do." I greeted the defendant with the same courtesy I extend to every person who stands before me, regardless of what I already know about why they are there. "Good morning, Mr. Hargrove. You have heard the charges read against you. Do you understand them?" He looked at me. His eyes were the polished, controlled eyes of a man who has spent years in boardrooms, polite on the surface, dismissive underneath. He said, "Good morning, Your Honor. I understand the charges as stated, though I want it on the record that many of these accusations represent a significant exaggeration of events, and some are politically motivated." Politically motivated. He said that about 19 suffering elderly human beings. I wrote something on my notepad. I did not respond to that statement, not yet. I wanted him to feel like the room was his. I wanted him comfortable, because arrogance, in my experience, only fully reveals itself when it feels like it is winning. And I had more to show him before this morning was done. Now, if you are watching this, and you have ever had a parent, a grandparent, or someone you love in a care facility, if you have ever sat beside someone in a hospital bed or a nursing home room and thought, "I am trusting these people with someone irreplaceable," then this story is for you. Hit that like button right now. Because stories like this one are exactly why it matters to pay attention. What you are about to hear is real, and it could happen anywhere. Rosa Vasquez had moved into Willowbrook Care Center 3 years earlier after a hip replacement surgery left her unable to manage safely on her own. She was not a frail woman by nature. She was sharp-minded, sharp-tongued in the loving way that women who have survived a great deal sometimes are. And she had opinions about everything, from the weather to the quality of the coffee. Leonard visited every weekend without fail. He brought her homemade tamales wrapped in foil, still warm. They played dominoes. They argued about soccer. He told me later that during the first year and a half at Willowbrook, things were acceptable. Not perfect. No care facility is perfect, but acceptable. The staff knew her name. She was fed on time. She was clean and relatively comfortable. Then, in early 2024, Dominic Hargrove implemented what he called a staffing efficiency initiative. That is when everything changed for Rosa, for Walter, for Mildred, for Claudette, for all 19 of them. I called for the state's first witness. Priya Mehta walked to the stand. She was 34 years old. She had a quiet kind of composure, the composure of someone who has been through something difficult and has decided to face it with as much steadiness as she can. She had worked as a licensed practical nurse at Willowbrook for 6 years. She was no longer employed there. She had resigned 7 months earlier, and the reason she resigned is one of the reasons we were all gathered in that courtroom on that cold February morning. I asked Nurse Mehta to describe what she had witnessed during the final 18 months of her employment at Willowbrook. She folded her hands in her lap. She took a breath. She began. She told the court that Hargrove's staffing efficiency initiative, his words, reduced the number of registered and licensed nurses on each shift by approximately 40%, not 10%, not 20, 40. He cut the hours of the certified nursing assistants, the CNAs, the people who provide the most direct, most physical, most intimate care to residents every single day, by nearly the same margin. He reduced the overnight staff on the Magnolia and Cedar Wings to a skeleton crew so thin that on some nights a single CNA was responsible for monitoring and responding to 30 residents alone. One person, 30 elderly, medically vulnerable residents, alone, in the dark, overnight. Nurse Mehta described what it felt like to be one of the nurses who remained, stretched beyond what was safe, managing double or triple a normal caseload, running from room to room trying to catch every problem before it became a crisis. She described call lights staying on, those small lights above each door that illuminate when a resident presses their call button, the button that is their only voice, their only way to say help. I need someone. She described those lights staying on for 20 minutes, for 30 minutes, while the one or two staff members on the floor tried to physically be in multiple places at once. She described Walter Drummond, 77 years old, the retired teacher, falling out of bed at 2 in the morning because there was no one near enough to hear him calling out before he reached for the edge. She described pressure sores, wounds that develop when elderly residents are not repositioned regularly, wounds that can become infected and life-threatening, appearing on residents who had been sore-free for years before the staffing cuts. She described medication errors because nurses who are managing twice their safe caseload are human beings, and human beings make mistakes when they are exhausted and overwhelmed, and the system around them has been deliberately dismantled for profit. While Priya Mehta spoke, I watched Dominic Hargrove. He was writing on a notepad, not listening, not watching the woman on the stand who was describing the destruction of his choices. Writing, like a man reviewing quarterly projections during a presentation he has already decided does not concern him. I said to him quietly, but with clarity, Mr. Hargrove, the witness before you is describing events that directly pertain to the charges against you. I would ask that you give her the courtesy of your attention. He looked up. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who is accustomed to managing other people's perceptions of him. Of course, Your Honor. I apologize. That was the first disrespect, small and practiced, but I filed it away. State Prosecutor Diane Okafor, a woman I have the greatest respect for, someone who prepares every case as if every single name in the file belongs to someone she knows personally, introduced Evidence Exhibit 1. It was a compiled binder, thick, heavy. The cover page, which I read aloud into the record, listed 47 documented violations at Willowbrook Care Center over an 18-month period, 47, falls resulting in injury, pressure sores at stages 2 and 3, a dehydration hospitalization, a urinary tract infection that progressed to sepsis, which is when an infection spreads to the blood and becomes life-threatening because it was not caught early enough, a medication overdose that put a 79-year-old woman named Gertrude Albright into intensive care for 11 days. Every single one of those 47 violations occurred after the Staffing Efficiency Initiative went into effect, not one before, every single one, every. I looked at Hargrove directly. Mr. Hargrove, were you made aware of these incident reports as they were filed? He glanced at Phelps, then at me. Your Honor, I received summary reports. The detailed management of individual incidents was handled at the department supervisor level. So your answer is yes, you were aware. In summary form, yes. And what specific actions did you take in response to those summaries? A beat, one of those pauses that is less about thinking and more about calculating. We implemented a quality improvement review process. I repeated his words back to him slowly. A quality improvement review process. 47 violations. Gertrude Albright in intensive care for 11 days. People falling. People developing open wounds on their bodies. And your response was a review process. The gallery was so quiet, I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above us. Gerald Phelps leaned close to his client. Whatever he said, Hargrove straightened and said, Your Honor, I want to state clearly that Willowbrook Care Center maintained full licensing status throughout this period. We were in compliance with minimum state standards for staffing at all times. Minimum. He said that word with the confidence of a shield. as if the minimum is a destination, as if the minimum is sufficient when the people depending on you cannot walk to the door and leave. I wrote the word down. I circled it. I planned to come back to it. Then came Evidence Exhibit 2, and this is where the case stopped being a story about neglect and became a story about something much colder and much more deliberate. Prosecutor Okafor brought forward a bound collection of printed communications, internal emails, and a thread of text messages exchanged between Dominic Hargrove and his operations manager, a man named Burke Tillman. These communications had been obtained by court-ordered subpoena after Hargrove's legal team spent 3 months attempting to block their release. They failed. I want to share some of these messages with you, word for word, because these are not characterizations. These are not interpretations. These are his own words, in his own handwriting, attached to his own name. March 14, 2024. Email from Hargrove to Tillman. The labor cost reduction on Magnolia and Cedar is performing at 42% below prior year. Keep it there. The union noise will die down. Those nurses just want more overtime hours. May 2nd, 2024. Text message from Hargrove to Tillman, sent 3 days after a state inspector flagged Willowbrook for insufficient overnight staffing. Standard protocol, bump by 2 per shift during inspection windows. Pull back after. We've managed this before. Don't overcorrect. Pull back after. He knew inspectors were coming. He planned to temporarily increase staffing just enough to pass inspection. And then, the moment the inspector left, he planned to pull it back. Back to the dangerous levels. Back to 1 CNA for 30 residents in the dark. Back to call lights staying on for 53 minutes while an 80-year-old woman lay on the floor of a bathroom. He had done it before. That phrase, "We've managed this before," tells you everything about what kind of operation this was. The gallery did not erupt. They did not shout. That is not the gallery's way, but I felt the shift in that room the way you feel a temperature change. Something had solidified. People had come in today believing something was wrong. Now they knew exactly how wrong it was and exactly how intentional it had been. Leonard Vasquez closed his eyes briefly. His jaw was tight. He pressed the photograph against his chest with both hands. I said, "Mr. Hargrove, I am reading from communications in which you instruct your operations manager to inflate staffing numbers specifically and only during regulatory inspection windows, and then to reduce them immediately after. Do you deny authoring these messages?" Gerald Phelps was already on his feet. "Your Honor, these messages are being read out of context." "Mr. Phelps." I did not raise my voice. I never raise my voice, but something in my tone made him stop. "Sit down, please." He sat. "Mr. Hargrove, do you deny these messages?" A long pause. Something was moving behind his eyes, something uncomfortable but still controlled. "No, Your Honor, I do not deny the messages. However, the full context of our operational situation at the time." Dominic. I used his first name for the first time. "In the 33 years I have sat on this bench, I have never read a more deliberate deception of the people responsible for protecting vulnerable human beings, dressed up in the clean language of business management." The gold watch caught the light as his hand moved. He said nothing more. "Now comes the part I need you to be ready for, because the next piece of evidence, Exhibit 3, is the one that changed the atmosphere in Providence Municipal Court from a courtroom into something that felt, for a few minutes, like a reckoning. I need you to be here for this. Stay with me. If you believe people in their most vulnerable moments deserve someone in their corner, subscribe to this channel right now, because this is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told loudly until the people making decisions like Dominic Hargrove's start making different ones. Prosecutor Okafor requested that the courtroom screens display a series of video files. These files came from Willowbrook's own internal security camera system, cameras that Hargrove himself had ordered installed 18 months earlier, specifically for liability protection purposes. He had wanted footage to protect the facility in case a resident or family member filed a lawsuit. The cameras had been watching, and what they recorded did not protect the facility, it condemned it. The first video showed the hallway of the Magnolia Wing at 2:48 in the morning. A call light above one of the doors was illuminated. The light stayed on. The corridor was empty. Minutes passed. The light stayed on. More minutes. The screen showed the timestamp advancing. 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. At the 31-minute mark, a single CNA appeared around the corner, moving quickly, clearly already exhausted from covering the entire wing alone. She stopped at the door and went inside. The second video showed a call light at 53 minutes. 53. And behind that door was Claudette Moreau, 80 years old, lying on the bathroom floor. She had tried to get up in the night without assistance. She had fallen, she had pressed her call button, and she had lain there on the cold tile floor of her bathroom, alone, for 53 minutes before anyone came. The gallery watched these videos without sound. The silence in that courtroom was the loudest thing I have heard in years of sitting on this bench. And then came the third video. And before it played, Prosecutor Okafor turned toward the gallery. She spoke directly to Leonard Vasquez. "Mr. Vasquez, this next video contains footage of your mother. I want you to know that you do not have to remain in the courtroom while it plays. You have the right to step outside." Leonard looked at her, he looked at me, and he shook his head slowly. He wasn't going anywhere. He was staying. He was going to watch. He was going to witness what his mother went through. He owed her that much. That is the kind of man Leonard Vasquez is. The video played. Rosa Vasquez was in her bed. It was nighttime. The room was lit only by the low ambient light from the corridor through the partially open door. She was visibly thinner than any photograph I had seen of her from 2 years earlier. Her arms were moving slowly above the blanket, her hands reaching upward, then falling, then reaching again, the motion of someone looking for something to hold, something to pull herself toward. Her mouth was moving. You could not hear what she was saying from the camera position, but you could read the shape of her lips, and I do not need to tell you what word an elderly woman calls out in the dark when she is afraid and alone. Nobody came. The video ran for 48 seconds before the file ended and the screen went dark. 48 seconds of Rosa Vasquez, alone, frightened, reaching, calling. Nobody came. I have sat on this bench for 33 years. I have heard testimony that has broken my heart. I have watched families fall apart in front of me. I have held my composure through things that I later had to sit alone with for a long time. But that 48-second video, Rosa's hands in the dark, reaching for someone who was not there, that is the kind of thing that marks you, that leaves a permanent watermark on your memory. Leonard Vasquez pressed the photograph to his face. His shoulders moved once, silently, and then he was still again, still and straight, and holding onto his mother's image like it was the only solid thing in the room. I took a breath. And then Dominic Hargrove said the most stunning thing I have heard inside my courtroom in 3 decades. His attorney was whispering urgently in his ear. I could see the effort Gerald Phelps was making, leaning in close, his hand on Hargrove's forearm, clearly trying to keep the lid on something. But Hargrove pulled back. He straightened. He looked at Prosecutor Okafor. He looked at the dark screen where Rosa had been reaching in the night, and he spoke. "Your Honor, with all respect to the emotional theater that has been staged in this room today, these were elderly patients already living well past their natural life expectancy. The financial model that kept Willowbrook's doors open was the sole reason any of those residents had a bed to lie in. Without my management decisions, that facility closes, and then they have nothing. Not a substandard bed, nothing. I made the only rational choices available to me in an underfunded system. I don't need a lecture about compassion from a bench that has never had to make a payroll. I did exactly what any competent business person in my position would have done. Emotional theater." He looked at that video of Rosa Vasquez reaching in the dark for someone to come. He looked at Leonard Vasquez holding his mother's photograph with tears on his face, and he called it emotional theater. I did not move. I counted. I remember the count because I remember making the deliberate choice to count. 10 seconds. I sat completely still, and I let those words remain in the air of my courtroom like something toxic that needed to be fully named before it could be dealt with. I watched the gallery. I saw people exchanging glances. I saw a woman in the second row close her eyes. I saw 2 of the former Willowbrook nurses gripping each other's arms. Leonard Vasquez lowered the photograph from his face and looked at Dominic Hargrove with an expression that I have tried to find words for, and I am still not sure I have the right ones. It was not fury. Fury is loud and bright. This was something quieter and much older. It was the face of a man who has been handed a truth so terrible that his body has gone completely still around it. It was grief that had traveled all the way to the other side of itself and come out looking like stone. A woman in the gallery said, clearly but without shouting, "Shame on you." Bailiff Raymond Costello took one step forward. I raised a single finger. He stopped. I needed this moment to be fully present in that courtroom before I moved us forward. Because what I was about to say, I needed everyone in that room to be ready to hear. Dominic, I used his first name again, deliberately. Dominic, I want you to do something for me right now. I want you to turn your head and look at the man sitting in the front row of this gallery. There was a pause, and then slowly, Dominic Hargrove turned. He looked at Leonard Vasquez. I said, "That man's name is Leonard Vasquez. He is 58 years old. He is a construction foreman. He left a job site this morning before dawn because he needed to be here. He is wearing a shirt he ironed the night before because he wanted to show his mother's memory, respect. He's been sitting in that chair since 9 o'clock, holding a photograph of Rosa Vasquez, a woman who raised 6 children alone, who played dominoes, who brought tamales to every family gathering, who lit up every room she was ever in, and his mother is gone, Dominic. She is gone, not because of old age, not because of natural decline. She died 6 weeks after the night on that video. She died from a urinary tract infection that was not caught, because the monitoring at your facility had been reduced to a level where basic observation was no longer reliably happening. A treatable infection, a completely treatable infection. In a properly staffed facility, it would have been caught in days. It was caught in hers when it had already reached her blood. I paused. You called that video emotional theater. I want to ask you a question, and I want you to think before you answer. When Rosa Vasquez was lying in that bed, reaching in the dark, calling out, who was she calling for? Hargrove said nothing. She was calling for someone to come. She was calling because she was frightened and alone and in pain, and she trusted, she had every reason to trust, that there would be someone nearby, that there would be a person whose job it was to make sure she was not alone in that moment. And you, Dominic, you made the decision that there would not be. You made that decision in March of 2024 with a spreadsheet and a text message. I watched him. His jaw was set. But his eyes, the controlled boardroom eyes, those were different now. Something had gone out of them. Not shame, not yet, but the beginnings of something that could become shame if it was given enough room to grow. Now I want to tell you something else. I have a letter. It was submitted to this court by a person who has been involved in this case in a way that I think you did not anticipate when you chose your actions. Prosecutor Okafor brought forward a single sheet of paper, not a binder, not a file, just one page. Handwritten in careful, slightly trembling script, the script of someone whose hands have lost some of their steadiness, but whose mind has lost none of its clarity. The paper was slightly worn at the edges, as if it had been folded and unfolded many times before arriving in my courtroom. I read it aloud. My name is Eleanor Fontaine. I'm 79 years old. I'm writing this letter from my hospital bed at Providence General, where I have been admitted due to a combination of health complications that developed during my 14 months as a resident of Willowbrook Care Center. I am also writing this as someone who has a particular and painful relationship to this case that I believe the court should know about. 24 years ago, I was the director of elder care programming at Greenfield Senior Living in Warwick, Rhode Island. In that capacity, I hired a 27-year-old named Dominic Hargrove as an assistant activities coordinator. He had no degree in the field. He had no experience. He had nothing to recommend him except energy and a genuine smile and what seemed to me like a real desire to do something meaningful with his life. I hired him because I believe people deserve chances, especially when they are asking for one honestly. I spent the next 2 years working alongside him every day. I trained him, I mentored him, I introduced him to people in the field. I taught him the principles that I had built my career on, that every resident in your care was, for decades, someone's entire world, that they arrived at your door with a lifetime of stories and love and sacrifice behind them, that your job every single day was to honor that. He told me, when he left to pursue his own directorship, that I had changed the direction of his life. He wrote me a card that said I was the reason he chose this field. I kept that card for 22 years. I moved into his facility 14 months ago because I trusted that he remembered what he had been taught. And I watched, from a wheelchair in the dining room, from a bed in a corridor room, I watched the lights stay on above the doors. I watched my friend Rosa Vasquez grow thinner and quieter and more frightened. I watched staff members run past each other in the hallways with the hollow eyes of people trying to hold back a flood with their bare hands. I did not fully understand what I was watching until it was too late to change what happened to Rosa. I am writing this letter because I am 79 years old, and I am in a hospital bed, and I believe there is a good chance I will not have many more opportunities to say things that need to be said in places where they will be heard. What Dominic Hargrove did was wrong. He knew it was wrong. He made the choices anyway. And I believe, because I knew him when he was young and honest and full of hope, that somewhere inside him, he still knows. I am not writing this to destroy him. I am writing this to insist that the truth be spoken out loud in a room where it cannot be erased. Signed, Eleanor Fontaine, February 12, 2026. I set the letter on my bench. I looked at Dominic Hargrove. Something had happened to his face. Not a dramatic collapse, not tears, something quieter and more complete. The composure was gone. The practiced boardroom expression was simply gone, the way a held breath is finally released, not with drama, but with a kind of exhausted inevitability. What was left underneath it was something much more recognizable, something much more human. A man looking at the wreckage of a version of himself he had spent years covering over. Dominic. That woman, Eleanor Fontaine, the woman whose letter I just read to this courtroom, is currently in Providence General Hospital, 6 blocks from where you are sitting. She is 79 years old. She is one of the 19 people harmed in this case. She is also the person who gave you your very first opportunity when you had nothing to offer but your word. She is the person who taught you, week after week, that the work you were choosing was about human beings, not numbers. And 24 years later, she moved into your facility because she trusted you. She trusted the version of you that she helped create, and she watched from her wheelchair while you ran her home like a spreadsheet. I leaned slightly forward. You stood before this court today and called this emotional theater. I want you to understand something clearly. There is no theater in a room where Leonard Vasquez is holding a photograph of his mother. There is no theater in 48 seconds of an 81-year-old woman reaching in the dark for someone to come. There is no theater in Eleanor Fontaine writing a letter from a hospital bed about a man she mentored and believed in and trusted and lost. That is not theater, Dominic. That is consequence. The consequence of every choice you made, dressed up in business language, from a corner office, while people who could not leave and could not demand better were slowly failed by the very institution that was supposed to protect them. I looked at him for a long moment. You said you don't need a lecture from a bench about compassion. And you are right. I am not here to lecture you about compassion. I am here to tell you what justice looks like. And then I am going to make sure you see it up close. I looked down at my notes. I had prepared the sentencing carefully, because a case like this, where harm is not a single act but a sustained pattern of calculated choices, requires a response that is not just about punishment. It has to be about understanding. It has to be structured so that the person responsible cannot simply write a check and walk away unchanged. Dominic Allen Hargrove, this court has heard the full testimony and reviewed all submitted evidence in case 2026 CR 04871. I am now prepared to deliver the sentencing of this court. Gerald Phelps opened his notepad. His pen was ready. First, financial restitution. You will pay a total financial penalty of $380,000. I want to explain exactly where every dollar of that number goes, because I want it on the record. $220,000 will be distributed through a court-administered restitution fund to the families of the 19 residents identified in this case, including the family of Rosa Vasquez. $120,000 will fund an immediate, comprehensive, independent audit of elder care facility staffing standards across the entire Providence metro area. Because what happened at Willowbrook did not occur in a vacuum, and this city deserves to know if it is happening elsewhere. $40,000 will fund trauma-informed counseling services for the surviving residents of Willowbrook who lived under these conditions. These are people who still carry what happened to them. They deserve support. A court-appointed financial monitor will verify all disbursements. The first installment of $100,000 is due within 30 days of today. Non-payment will result in an immediate contempt hearing. Hargrove's hand moved slightly on the table. Phelps wrote something down. Second, immediate license suspension. Your license to operate, direct, manage, own, or hold any controlling interest in a licensed elder care facility in the state of Rhode Island is suspended immediately and indefinitely as of this moment. You may apply for reinstatement after a minimum period of 5 years. That reinstatement process will require a full public hearing in this court, sworn testimony from former employees, a complete review of your compliance with every term of today's sentencing, and a unanimous recommendation from the Rhode Island Elder Care Oversight Board. If any one of those conditions is not met, reinstatement will be denied. 5 years, not 4 years and 11 months, 5 years. Third, community service. And I want you to hear what this means because it is not symbolic. It is real. I looked at him steadily. You will complete 900 hours of community service, not administrative work, not volunteer organizing, not fundraising for a charity whose name will look good on a press release. You will serve those 900 hours as a direct care aide at a state-run elder care facility in Providence. You will answer call lights. You will assist residents with meals. You will help people bathe and dress and move safely. You will do the work that the people you cut, the nurses and CNAs whose hours you slashed, were doing when you decided their labor cost was too high. You will work morning shifts, 3 days per week. You will not identify yourself as a former director. You will not speak about your professional history unless directly and unavoidably asked. You will simply do the work. You will report to the facility supervisor, and that supervisor will submit a monthly compliance report directly to this court. You will also keep a journal throughout this service, not a summary document, not a report prepared by your attorney, a personal journal written in your own hand, with weekly entries describing what you witnessed, what you felt, and what you thought about while you were doing this work. At the completion of your 900 hours, that journal will be delivered to this court, reviewed by a court-appointed social worker, and entered into the permanent record of this case. Fourth, public accountability. Within 60 days, you will appear before the Providence Community Elder Care Council in an open public session. You will deliver a formal address describing, in your own words and not words prepared by your legal team, the specific operational decisions you made at Willowbrook and the documented harm those decisions caused. Family members of all 19 residents will be formally invited to attend. The session will be open to the press. There will be no prepared script. You will also compose individual, handwritten letters of personal apology to the family of each of the 19 residents. 19 letters, handwritten. Specific, meaning each letter must reference that particular person by name and acknowledge a particular harm. These letters will be reviewed before delivery by a court-appointed social worker who will determine whether they are genuine and adequate. Generic letters will be returned, and you will write them again. I paused. Then I said something I had thought carefully about. And there is one more thing I am requiring of you personally, Dominic, not because the law specifies it, because it is the right thing to do, and I believe, somewhere in you, you already know that. You will go to Providence General Hospital. You will go to Eleanor Fontaine's room. You will sit beside her, and you will read your letter to her, out loud to her face. Not send it, not have someone deliver it. You, in person. The woman who gave you your first chance in this field deserves to receive your words directly from you in the same room where she can look at you while she hears them. Fifth, and finally, I let a moment pass. Dominic Allen Hargrove, your statements in this courtroom today, specifically your characterization of the victim's testimony as emotional theater, and your assertion that your profit margins were the singular justification for the care those 19 individuals received, constitute contemptible disrespect to this court and to every person named in this case. I am issuing a formal finding of contempt of court. Bailiff Costello. Raymond Costello moved forward from his position near the wall. He moved with the quiet professionalism that I have always respected in him. No drama, no performance, just the steady movement of a person doing a serious job with dignity. Dominic Hargrove's composure broke completely and finally. His hands went flat on the table. His face changed, not into something dramatic, but into something smaller and more honest than anything I had seen from him all morning. His jaw worked once, silently. Mr. Hargrove, you will be remanded to custody for a period of 48 hours. You will return to this court for a mandatory review hearing on March 6, 2026. At that hearing, if you have demonstrated cooperation with the financial restitution terms, enrolled in the mandated aid service program, and shown measurable good faith on the accountability requirements, no additional custodial time will be imposed. If you have not, I will be seeing you again in a different context. The handcuffs were placed on his wrists. His gold watch caught the light one more time. Gerald Phelps spoke quietly. Hargrove nodded, almost mechanically, like a man on the other side of something he did not fully understand yet. He was walked toward the side door. He passed within 10 feet of the front row gallery. He did not look at Leonard Vasquez, but Leonard looked at him. Leonard Vasquez, with his construction foreman's hands and his ironed shirt and his photograph held against his chest, watched Dominic Hargrove walk through the side door of my courtroom. And then, very slowly, he lowered his eyes to the photograph, to his mother's face. He put one hand flat over her image, like he was telling her, I was here. I stayed. I witnessed it all for you. That is the most powerful act of love I have seen in this courtroom in a very long time. Now, before I tell you what happened in the weeks after that morning, I need you to do something. If this story has moved you, if you felt something watching Leonard hold that photograph, if you felt something hearing Eleanor Fontaine's letter read out loud in an empty courtroom, share this video with someone you love who has a parent or grandparent in a care facility. Not to frighten them, to remind them to pay attention, to visit, to ask questions, to be the person who shows up. Share it right now, because that act of attention might be the thing that makes all the difference for someone. In the weeks that followed the hearing, several things happened. Dominic Hargrove was released after his 48 hours. He appeared at the March 6th review hearing. He had made the initial restitution payment. He had enrolled in the aid program and completed his first 2 weeks of service. His attorney reported compliance. For once, there was almost nothing to argue. But the piece that stayed with me, the thing I keep returning to, came from Nurse Priya Mehta. 3 weeks after the hearing, she happened to be at the courthouse on an unrelated matter, and she stopped me in the hallway. She said she had spoken with a former colleague who was now working at the same facility where Hargrove was completing his service hours. Her colleague said that Hargrove had been on time every day, that he had not told anyone his background, that he had answered call lights without being asked, that one morning a resident on the memory care wing had woken disoriented and frightened, the way people with memory conditions sometimes do, waking up convinced they are somewhere else, in some other year, looking for someone who is no longer living. And Hargrove had sat down beside him. He had not called for someone else. He had not stepped back. He had sat down, taken the man's hand, and talked to him quietly. About nothing important, just ordinary things. The kind of gentle, tethering conversation that brings a frightened person back to the present until the man was calm. I do not know what that moment meant for Dominic Hargrove. I do not know if a person can truly undo the consequences of choices that cost 19 people their dignity and in some cases their lives. I have been a judge long enough to know that transformation is not a moment. It is not a courtroom speech and a set of handcuffs. It is a long, unglamorous, daily practice of doing better than you have done before, with no audience and no applause, one morning shift at a time. But I believe in the possibility. I have to. That belief is part of what makes it possible for me to sit on this bench. Leonard Vasquez received his portion of the restitution. He wrote a letter to the court, 3 handwritten pages, in the same careful way he had ironed his shirt the morning of the hearing, to tell me what he intended to do with it. He did not want it for himself. He donated every dollar to a nonprofit organization in Providence that recruits, trains, and coordinates volunteer companions for elderly residents in care facilities, people who visit, who sit and talk, who play cards, who make sure that no one is lying in a room pressing a call button with no one coming. He asked that the donation be made in his mother's name, in memory of Rosa Vasquez, and Eleanor Fontaine, who wrote her letter from a hospital bed not knowing if she would leave it, received her apology. A member of her family later wrote to the court to confirm what had happened. Dominic Hargrove came to the hospital. He found her room. He sat in the chair beside her bed. He took out his letter, and he read it to her, all of it. He cried. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said to him, "And I want you to hear this because I have thought about these words more than once since I was told them." She said, "I already forgave you, Dominic. I forgave you before I wrote that letter. I just needed you to know what you did. I already forgave you. I just needed you to know what you did." That is the kind of grace that does not come from nowhere. It comes from a lifetime of choosing to see the humanity in people even when they have given you every reason not to. Eleanor Fontaine spent 50 years in elder care because she believed in people. She believed in the man she saw in a 27-year-old with no degree and a genuine smile. She still believed in that man enough to write a letter from a hospital bed to tell him the truth, because she thought the truth might bring him back to himself. I do not know if I could do what she did, but I am grateful she did it in a room that is part of my record. At the end of the day that Dominic Hargrove was led out of my courtroom in handcuffs, after the gallery had emptied and the bailiff had secured the side door and the particular evening quiet had settled over Providence Municipal Court, I stayed at my bench. I do this sometimes. I sit with the day. I let the room be still. I think about what happened, and I try to understand it as fully as I can before I take it home with me. I thought about the word minimum. I thought about the way Dominic Hargrove had used it like a legal argument. We met the minimum, as if the minimum is sufficient, as if the minimum means no one can touch you, as if the minimum is acceptable when the people under your care are too old, too weak, too isolated, too dependent to demand anything more. Here is what I know after 33 years on this bench. The minimum is an insult disguised as a standard. When someone cannot get up and leave, when someone cannot call a different facility, when someone cannot fire you or review you or advocate loudly for themselves, when someone is entirely dependent on the choices you make from a safe distance, you do not get to offer them the minimum. You owe them your best, not your company policy, not your projected margins, not your inspection week compliance numbers, your actual best. That is the only standard that matters when the people you serve cannot ask for more. I still see Rosa Vasquez on that screen, 48 seconds, her hands reaching slowly in the low light of an empty room, her mouth moving, the words she was saying, the silence where an answer should have been. If you are a person in a position of care, any kind of care in any kind of institution, and you are watching this, remember that video. Remember those 48 seconds. Remember what it means to be the person who was supposed to come and then go be that person. Every single time. That is what justice asks of all of us. Not after the fact, not in a courtroom, before. The justice that actually matters happens before anyone needs a judge. I hope Rosa Vasquez is in a place where someone came. I hope the light is always on.